Good evening. Silent Majority brings you Dr. Abdul Wahid today. Dr. Abdul Wahid is a prominent doctor and a vocal, outspoken supporter of Palestine, and he also speaks about the oppression caused by Israel, the occupiers, their terrorism, and essentially what's happened since October 7th. Now, as we all know, history doesn't start in October 7th. At October 7th, it starts 75, 80 odd years ago. So I've brought on Dr. Abdul Wahid, my esteemed guest, mashallah, he's very modest, to talk about the Piers Morgan interview that happened over a year or so ago now. I think it happened last December. And we'll be discussing what's happened in that interview, what transpired from it, and we'll also be talking about Palestine in its current state and till this day, and also what Trump has proposed for Palestine. So there's a lot to dissect. Before I do introduce Dr. Abdul Wahid, I'd like to put up clips from that famous Piers Morgan interview, so you can get an idea and just to recast your memory back to how that interview went and the aggression put towards Dr. Abdul Wahid by Piers Morgan. So that should be playing for you right now.
They weren't chanting, "We want military intervention." They were chanting jihad. So my question for you is simply, do you support the chanting of jihad? So do you condemn what happened on October the 7th?
If atrocities are committed, you know who's
responsible.
What do you mean if? No,
they were.
Who's responsible for it then?
So you don't condemn it?
Okay. Who is responsible?
Well, the Jews brought it on themselves.
No, actually,
Doctor, I think a lot of the response from Israel, particularly right now, I would deem to be testing everyone's sense of what is proportionate, right? There's no question. I do not subscribe to the view it's genocide. Well,
that is the understatement of the century.
Possibly NHS doctor in Britain. How can you say that's a welcome punch on the nose?
Will you let me answer fully?
Yes.
I will be frank. I'll be as concise as I can be. But if you give me the courtesy of letting me answer fully.
What happened on October the 7th?
I asked you to let me finish.
That was a grotesque
I will
terror
ask
attack.
you to finish.
Yeah, but you're equivocating about it being a terror attack.
I'm not equivocating. And listen to the most ridiculous explanations.
Unlike you and your answers, you mean?
Well, you don't give me the chance to say
No, I've heard your answers.
No, you didn't.
I have. In May 2023, a prominent...
No, I have to... No,
I'm going to ask you another question.
You did not give me the courtesy of letting me finish.
You know why? Because your answers were so outrageous.
You censor. That's your answer.
No.
Yeah,
I don't censor. Well, they're listening to this interview. Do these patients know your views?
I have said to you...
Do they know your views?
I don't talk to my patients about my views in a 10-minute consultation, do I? Nobody does that. It's just a foolish question, isn't it?
We all know they did it because they boasted to the world with their own videos what they were doing.
I find it amazing that respected journalists like yourself have seemed to have suspended their critical faculties.
No, I'm believing what Hamas wanted me to see.
Well, why do so many women become Muslim these days? Why do
they
so
want to
many
be
women in the
oppressed?
West?
Is that what you're going to tell me?
No. Why do so many Muslim...
Because they want to be oppressed?
Women in the world become Muslim these days?
Now, the viewers have watched a summary of that interview, an appalling interview. I was aghast as a viewer myself. Before we start, I'd like to thank my main sponsor, 135 Body. If you don't like going to the gym but want a great body, they have a method where you train once a week and you get the body as if you went to the gym for 3, 4, 5 times a week. So if you are interested in that, do check them up on their website. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Abdul Wahid.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute honor and an absolute pleasure to have you here. And we, from Silent Majority, really, really appreciate this. And I think this is really what we stand for. I think, if I may, as a member of the audience myself, watching that interview, I was horrified by how Piers Morgan attacked you. And he had an agenda that he was obviously fulfilling. But what really came across to me was his hatred for you. And I can presume that he didn't know you prior to that. But he had... what sort of seeped through is the aggression and the hate that he had towards you. The fact that he almost is akin to a barrister cross-examining a defendant in court, but the only difference was you as the defendant had no mouthpiece. He asked you questions, he asked you leading questions, he asked you questions that entrapped you and ensnared you, but didn't give you the opportunity to speak back. There was no decorum, there was no etiquette. He didn't give you any courtesy whatsoever. Inshallah, we as Silent Majority will, under the paradigms of Islam and etiquettes and manners, will give you that platform and will give you definitely the opportunity to speak your mind. Before we do start though, I must say that I think you're a very, very brave man in this sort of democratic society that we live in. I mean, it's glaringly open how people are censured, and we'll come on to that and how that interview and what led to after that interview about how this cancel culture and they try to destroy your life and, you know, your livelihood and all of those things we'll come into and we'll touch upon. But firstly, I'd like to get your perspective on how the interview of Piers Morgan went. So the stage is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So, I mean, I'd been invited on to talk about Gaza. I hadn't been invited on to talk about my professional life. I keep my politics and my work very separate. I don't bring my politics into the workplace. I don't address in my political life issues related to my work. It's just they're very separate. And I'd made that clear. But the editorial team had approached me about speaking about Gaza. Obviously, at that time, 2 months into the massacres in Gaza, mainstream media was pretty much on one side, on the Zionist side, really not giving another platform. And Piers Morgan on his Talk TV show had tried to open a niche, widening their audience by bringing on the odd pro-Gaza voice. And generally, he was quite robust and with them and quite taking a very much a pro-Zionist editorial line. So I was under no illusions about that. I'd already been attacked in the right-wing print media prior to this. But, you know, I wanted to go on to address some key things. And I think from my perspective, in the first few minutes of the interview, I did manage to address those. But he got more and more aggressive, and he actually ended up having a meltdown. And then after the show, raising the issues about my work and stuff. So I think in retrospect, everything about that interview has become about that. But for me, it was so important because as Muslims around the world, we are praying for Gaza, we're raising money for Gaza, we're trying to highlight the crimes that are going on in Gaza. But the one thing that very few of us talk about is what actually would be necessary to liberate Gaza, to rescue the people. And we started in that interview with him raising the fact that there was a demonstration in London where somebody from the sidelines had shouted the word jihad. And the context of that demonstration was outside the Egyptian embassy. And it was not calling for anything random. It was not calling for violence against civilians. It's not calling for something un-Islamic. It was calling for the trained professional armies of Muslim countries to go in and rescue the people of Gaza. Anywhere else in the world where a civilian population was being massacred by a state-level military force, you would get people calling for NATO intervention or UN peacekeepers. But in the case of Palestine, in the case of Gaza, nobody was saying it, or hardly anyone. The people of Gaza themselves have said it. Many social media feeds I've seen where people saying, where are the Arabs? Where are the Muslims? And they don't mean your auntie or my parents or anything like that. They mean the soldiers who have military equipment to come and rescue them. So for me, that raising that point, and I even said to him, you know, he himself is on the record as saying that when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, why isn't NATO going in harder to help the people of Ukraine? So if you can say that for Ukraine, which is on paper one of the most strong armies in the world, why can't you say that about Palestine when they have no one? They have no army, they have nothing to defend them. And at that point, he chose to go down the road of saying, yeah, but they have terrorists to defend them and stuff, which was nasty. It's nasty because, you know, our feeds are full of children, women, men, families being destroyed, hospitals being destroyed, press being killed, homes being destroyed. And he's using this same kind of nasty pro-Israel Zionist trope, like about, you know, terrorism and stuff all the time, which is just really just trying to create an opinion that anything we do there, any massacre that happens, that's justified. And if there was one thing I wanted to go on and try and do was to break that. And yeah, it brought his anger out. It had, like, I think, actually exposed him for who he was and what that show was. Strangely enough, they invited me on again later in the week. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
His production team contacted me later in the week and said, could he come on? I said, you know, you had your show with me on the Monday. You had a show about me with somebody else on the Tuesday. And now on Wednesday, you're phoning me up to say, can I come in on Thursday? I said, I'm sorry that, you know what, it felt to me like they felt they hadn't achieved what they wanted and they wanted another go. And I thought to myself, no, that's not the way it works. When it's not usually the winner who asks for a rematch, it's the loser, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it felt to me a little bit like that. So that's, I mean, alhamdulillah, that unfortunately the points I wanted to make, I don't think they were remembered, but I wish they had been heard more. And I wish to this day, even to this day, when we see there's supposedly a ceasefire, where it's said that between 60 and 100 people in Gaza have been killed since the ceasefire. I mean, that's just not normal. Anywhere else in the world, that would be considered unacceptable. That would be considered like crime. But we've become so used to Muslim blood, Palestinian blood being spilled, that people forget that what they need is rescuing. And you don't rescue people who are under a military bombardment by anything except a military response.
Thank you, Doctor. And we all come on to what's normal now. I think there are striking comparisons between Ukraine and Palestine, yet there's a huge disparity within itself. You have Ukraine, who is a military force, and most of the world, the entirety of UN, including the US, are funding them and giving them arsenal, military-grade arsenal to defend themselves, defend itself, herself against Russia. And I think you mentioned it before I could get to it. You know, when you asked that to that bottom-feeding Neanderthal, he said they've got Hamas. That's what he said. They've got Hamas. The only comparison I can say is if the US were fighting the Sinaloa cartel, and then they went to Colombia and they said, oh, you've got the Sinaloa cartel fighting for you, but you're fighting US. That's how ridiculous and ludicrous
that statement is. It's one of the nastiest things about that statement is that it echoes the Zionist propaganda within occupied Palestine, which is that they're all Hamas. They're all guilty. Yeah, it really just echoes that. And that's one of the nasty things that comes out of this. It's like the pro-occupation view, the pro-Zionist view has become that they're all guilty. It's almost like when Musa alayhi salam is in Egypt with Firaun, and Firaun wants to kill the children of Israel. Why? Because he's afraid that one of their sons is going to grow up and take him on. So he's going to kill all their sons. And it's that same kind of language that comes out of the Zionist occupiers and their supporters, that it's like they're all the same. They're all supporters of these quote unquote terrorists.
Just a side question, Doctor. And the press that you've been getting from the wider media, particularly the right-wing media, so you have GB News and Piers Morgan, etc., 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 other disgusting things about you, Terror Doc, and the thing is, this is very well thought out and very smart in what they've done. The play on words, Terror Doc. So you've got Doctor, which is regarded across the world as someone it's a good term. The semantics of it is good, professional, you're helping people, you're saving people's life. When you put terror onto it, it becomes a dichotomy. And I think, having said that, you're obviously, alhamdulillah, patently Muslim. And again, I think that term itself is Islamophobic. And I want to bring it back to the Piers Morgan interview again. The way in which he conducted that interview, and I think one of the most outrageous things this animal said, after you said that after the 7th of October attack, and when the world really did open its eyes to Palestine and what really was happening there, a lot of non-Muslim women, because he did try and attack you there, right? Saying that you hate feminists and you think, and he alluded to you think that women should be locked up in cupboards. That's what he was alluding to. He was portraying the picture. He had an agenda. And when you said, well, in fact, women are coming into Islam in droves because they're really understanding what Islam's about and the emancipation of women. His response to that was, if I may I may have to rephrase here.
Because they want to be oppressed.
Because they want to be oppressed.
Because they want to be oppressed. And in fact, when he said that in the interview, it threw me a bit because I thought, what's that? Hang on, how come he's saying that? That doesn't make sense. I'm saying people are voluntarily becoming Muslim, and Muslim women are voluntarily embracing Islam. And he's saying because they want to be oppressed, the two statements didn't match up. It's literally, he let out what was in his mind about an association of Islam, women and oppression in his mind. So he revealed a lot about himself in that interview.
So he openly was Islamophobic, yet the whole interview, and I have analysed it and I was disgusted by it, he tried to bait you into saying something silly.
Yeah.
He did that throughout the interview.
Yeah.
And when you did it naturally, he got away with it.
Yes.
No one batted an eyelid. He just said, Islam oppresses women.
Yes.
That is hugely Islamophobic.
Well, he didn't really get away with it because he had obviously that evening I was monitoring what was happening on social media, and he had a massive backlash against him. And to the extent that the next day, before he started his program, he did a 5-minute monologue it was like an apology, backtrack. It was not an apology. He's not the type to apologize.
No.
But he did like a backtrack. So I think he knew that injured him. And I think that whole interview, that whole program interviewed him. I don't think anyone else went on that show afterwards without knowing exactly where that show is coming from, what angle they take, what is this man like, what is his views like. I mean, there was an interesting point there where he picked up there was a YouTube program I was on, and I was asked about the 7th of October. And I used, I would say, clumsy wording. I said it was a punch on the nose and a welcome punch on the nose for Israel. You know, I'm meant by that, it was like egg on their face. It was an embarrassment. It was a humiliation. They try and come out invincible. They try and terrify the Palestinians with their power. They intimidate them. There's this impression in the Middle East that they're invincible. And then they didn't know this was coming. Their intelligence failed. And, you know, it's a humiliation. It's egg on their face, right? I use the term punch on the nose, which like implies violence. So he was picking up on that. And I said, look, I'll answer that. I'll answer your point in full if you let me. He said, okay. And then like literally within a few seconds, he's like, you know, so like what is meant as a humiliation, he wants to twist as like you're the supporter of illegitimate violence. Yeah, that's what, but he wouldn't let you say it, let me say it. So that I think exposed him again, because the level of the interruption he gave was not reasonable for any reasonable journalistic program, to be honest.
And I think you just said any of his pro-Zionist guests that come on, or someone who supports Israel in what they do, he will give them the mic, flowers, chocolates, relax, say what you need to say, and then I may interject.
Completely. And even when he wants to put a point to them, which is controversial, it's like a underarm softball which they can hit for 6. So literally that's the way that this, and then he can tick his box and say, well, you know, I did due diligence in my journalism, I put that question to them. But of course it's not like that. And I think if one thing that we've learned over the last 15 months is that Western media, mainstream media, even if these journalists have some journalistic integrity from their professional skills, there's an editorial line, and the editorial line is politicized. It's not neutral. They do not, and we've seen it in the way that media report Palestine. Palestinians died, whereas Israelis are killed. The hostages released, the Israeli prisoners released. You know, so many of them come out looking healthy. 3 came out last week looking malnourished. Malnourished because they're in North Gaza probably, where there is no food going in, and all the people are malnourished. And we're seeing images of people starving in that region. So no reporting that they're malnourished because no food is getting into North Gaza, and no mention that the other, you know, prisoners, hostages look healthy. And yet so many images of Palestinian hostages coming out of Israeli jails who have terrible health looks. They've aged so much. They're malnourished. They're skin and bone. They've got injuries. They're reporting torture. Nothing mentioned on the mainstream media about these things, and we've seen that, and it's been exposed. And I hope we learn these lessons, because too often people around the world trust these sources of news. They trust these journalists. They see them one day saying something positive and they're on their side. And they forget that before they were saying something negative.
I think with the fact that you'll just pick on your point about saying Palestinian hostages, and they use them as prisoners, they say, so that
Yes.
what media at large says prisoners, and then
Yes.
Palestinian captives are hostages,
Yes.
right? And just to add a bit more to what you've said, and very good point about Northern Gaza, and everyone is starving there, so everyone is going to be starving. Over the course of this ceasefire deal, and prior to that, when hostages were released from both sides, there's so many accounts whereby Palestinian hostages coming out of Israeli dungeons have come out with psychological impediments, looking like they've been through war. They've been left to rot,
Traumatized,
tortured.
really traumatized.
Not to mention the rape allegations.
Some of them have gone in as children and come out as old-looking men, and many of them have been detained and either not charged or charged with something trivial, just picked up randomly, stitched up. They are not, by no means are these hundreds of people that are being released have been guilty of crimes or have had any due process. Maybe some have, but many, many, many of them that are coming out are people who have been picked up in unjust ways. And it's not something that has been really widely publicized.
This weaponizing, and I go back to the interview, they weaponize the term jihad, which, and the thing is, what he's doing is he's flaring and stoking the tensions between the different communities that live in the UK. Now, if an Englishman, a layman who's an atheist or even a Christian, most probably an atheist, was to pick up on that word, because it's been weaponized across the media, he's going to think fundamentalist, radicalist, Taliban looking, long beard, is going to blow himself up. Jihad, as you eloquently put it, and the demonstration that happened outside the Egyptian embassy was calling on military personnel to go and defend.
Yeah, so it's what you call in political language military intervention.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Islamic Sharia, the rules of Islamic warfare, it is effectively military intervention. It is not, and in fact that is something where we as Muslims we have a weakness, because either we fall into the trap where we want to talk about jihad as jihadun nafs, just struggle within ourselves, or we fall into the trap of the Western talking points, which is it's only about illegitimate violence or political violence, what they call terrorism, right? Or you have some that think of it purely in terms of resistance. So, people resisting in Palestine, people resisting in Kashmir, people are resisting in Iraq and Afghanistan over the years, and just thinking of resistance to occupation. But actually, Islam is a comprehensive way of life with its own rules of warfare. And these are the rules of jihad, right? So in the same way as they have the Geneva Convention, they have rules of military engagement for their armies, we have that in Islam. And we need to reclaim that. That's not to say that, that's the best thing to be shouting in a demonstration. That's not necessarily the case. And I'm happy to make that point. But the actual substance of what's being talked about and called for in terms of military intervention is completely legitimate, and it comes from an Islamic place. It comes from an Islamic position.
The three things that over the course of, since the inception on October 7th, for a lot of people, including Piers Morgan, up until this very day, there's famous quotes that my viewers and everyone around the world would know. And one of the questions was famously put to you incessantly, do you condemn Hamas?
Yes.
Do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? And you, in a respectful way, by utilizing your free speech, try to explain what the situation is so much more bigger than condemning Hamas. Hamas is like a pea or in the ocean. I want to ask you something else, actually. Do you condemn the IDF?
Oh, unequivocally.
Thank you.
And I don't even call them the IDF, because the D stands for defense. You should call them the IOF, the offense force, occupation force.
Force.
The O should be offense or occupation. The thing about condemnation, look, he's trying to trip up because this is a proscribed organization in the UK. So to say anything, to endorse it, is an illegal thing. So he's trying to pick you up on that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make the point that you're using this condemn word, this T word for terrorism and stuff, in a way that is politically biased, right? You're selecting your labels. And when you ask people to do that, it's bad, it's wrong. You know why? Because when you label resistance, and bear in mind, we're talking about a lot of resistance groups, and not all of them are prescribed in English law, right? But when you talk about resistance, and you are telling people to condemn resistance, and labeling it as all as terrorism, effectively what you're saying is the Israelis are justified in doing what they want. The Zionist occupiers are legitimate in massacring men, women and children in the way they are. You, by constantly asking people to condemn, you're politicizing one side, saying these are the bad guys and the rest are the good guys. And if the good guys have to do unacceptable things to the bad guys, so be it. So I'm trying to make that point. I'm trying to make the point that you should understand. Everyone knows one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. It's all political labels. He doesn't want to go down that road. He knows it, but he doesn't want to go down that road.
He's a smart man.
He doesn't want to go down that road.
This dehumanization, this was just some part of the dehumanization across the media and across the Western world of Palestinians. One would have to, I think I may have to do an episode on specifically the wording and the use of language and word into dehumanize Palestinians and Muslims at large across the world. Lastly, because this interview was so fascinating in terms of the tactics and the immoral and cowardly approaches that he used against you. And remarkably, you stood tall, and in spite of the fact on multiple attempts he tried to ensnare you and entrap you in falling for the bait, and you quite rightly put it, and we've shown the footage, they lost his cool and his rag by the end of it. I want to go back to the point where you said he didn't get away with calling women in Islam being oppressed. The thing is, there's a stark difference here, and this is what leads me on now. What ensued from that interview was a witch hunt where they tried to destroy your life. After him saying what he said about Muslim women and them being oppressed, his position was not put into disrepute. He still had his job. No,
he'll still have his job because he's doing his job. And he's doing his job to demonize one side of the conflict. In that he's doing his job, or he's trying to do his job. I don't think he achieved it. Look, what happened to me was one case in many. It's maybe one of the more high-profile cases. But as we know, after the massacre in Gaza started, pro-Palestinian people who were voicing what they wanted to say, whether on demonstrations or online, the pro-Zionist lobby were finding quotes, finding tweets, finding statements online, taking photos at demos, and passing those to either the legal authorities if they thought it was a crime, or to employers. And that was happening. Actually, it's said that there are between 350 to 400 doctors who have been reported to the various regulators.
Wow.
For things they're supposed to have said, of which I think I'm right in saying about 75% of those cases or more have been dismissed on the first examination of them, and the remainder have gone through the due process. So this is people wasting, frankly, professional regulators' time on a very divisive and very emotive conflict where you have two sides and you have emotions running very high on two sides, and really using this as a proxy in there to try and silence people and try and scare people. We saw a woman who's a teacher going on a demonstration with an image of two coconuts on a palm tree, and she had the faces of two politicians on there.
I saw that, yeah.
And this is a woman of color, brown woman, I think from a South Asian background, and she's talking about two other people from South Asian backgrounds, and yet she's arrested and has to go through the full legal process to be acquitted in the end of it for what is obviously a satirical comment. And that is a shameful thing in a society that calls itself free, but we know it's not truly free. We know all political speech is subject to it's censorship in different societies. And we're seeing that criticism of a Zionist occupation of Palestine and the genocide it's committing is one that is likely to try and get you censored. So it's even more important to keep speaking. And in fact, yes, we don't want to fall into traps. Yes, we don't want to say anything criminal. We don't want to fall into stereotypes. So this idea of conflating Judaism with Zionism is a very common way that people try and defend the occupation of Palestine. But actually, we see many Jews opposing what's happening, and many non-Jews who are Zionists.
It's true.
Yeah, most of the people in the British government, Keir Starmer, before him Rishi Sunak, before him Boris Johnson, they will all say that they're Zionists. They're all pretty much pro the occupation of Palestine. They're not Jewish, right? So it's not a religious issue for us. It's not an ethnic issue for us. It's a political issue, and it's a political issue so our language and our targets need to be on that political issue.
This anti-Semitic term that's used very loosely now, so loosely on anyone. And you're right to say that, even Jews are coming out on the streets of London saying this is not anti-Semitic. This is clearly black and white. What's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. And if you look at a question that I want to ask, that I'm just going to put it to you now. So this world that we live in, or Britain in particular, how far, I want your opinion here, and this is a question put to you. Do we live in a country whereby we can call it censorship Britain, whereby democracy has eroded to such an extent that there is no such thing as democracy anymore, where free speech is definitely being censored and you will be scrutinized and penalized for it? And have we almost moved into a passive, and this is a bold statement here, passive dictatorial era now?
Yeah, I see it as a bit different, to be honest with you. I think it's more apparent. It was always the case that every society has its limits on speech. And when everyone's conforming and everyone's speaking within the boundaries of that, it feels free. We're in an era now where the boundaries of that have become tighter. Definitely since the so-called war on terror, a lot of speech, political views of Muslims, Islamic views of Muslims have been put under the microscope through the Prevent program and stuff like that. So that curtails speech. With this assault on Gaza, we see that pro-Palestine voices, anti-Israel voices are being narrowed. So that curtails speech. There's a lot of social things with the changes in social norms that we see, where people criticize people for their sexuality and stuff like that. That is now, and conversely, you have in America with these a right-wing government coming in, J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, saying this week in the Munich Security Conference that Europe and Britain is going against free speech. Why? Because you can't be racist enough. You can't be sexist enough, and you can't be Islamophobic enough, right? So they think that where the law that is used to protect other people is actually, which is meant to protect other people, it's actually used to protect Muslims or other minorities, that's unacceptable. You should let people be more racist. You should let people be more Islamophobic. You should let people be more misogynistic, is what they think, right? Because that's free speech. And it's a paradox, isn't it? Because they want to silence one side of speech and not the other. So I think we're getting used to that. But I do think it is so important that we need to keep speaking. We need to keep speaking because, we still have a voice, and we might fear for what consequences come. But if we're not stupid, not reckless in the way we talk about things, then we can say a lot. And let's face it, one of the big failures of the Zionists is they've lost public opinion around the world. People in Britain, the majority of people, I think, are wondering what is going on. Why has the British government supported the aggressor as far as they can see? Yeah, how can their government support this? They can't get their heads around it. and so that's a big fail for the occupation. They've spent the best part of the last 77 years trying to accept that they're a normal country, and everyone can see there's nothing normal about having to kill your way into existence like this, having to ethnically cleanse another people in order to get your status to be recognized. That is the way it is, and more people have seen that, I think.
This machine, this propaganda machine that Zionists have spent millions, multi-billions in trying to create the best PR front possible. And quite rightly you said, the whole world has taken off the blinders and seen that it isn't what it is. The trouble is, though, in spite of that, in spite of the world waking up and opening their eyes, in spite of that, Israel continue to do what they do, carte blanche, flagrantly. And I think the tactics and methods have changed now. Instead of portraying visuals and video and footage, people have woken up and they've smelt the coffee, they smelt the bullshit, excuse my language. But I think what the powers that be are adopting now is much more forceful tactics. I draw comparisons when the British were fighting the IRA and the internment that happened in this country.
Yes.
I wouldn't say it's akin to that, but there are a lot more forceful tactics whereby you can lose your job. They can take your income away from you, because ultimately in this country, it's not violence that they use to control you. It's taking away your income. With that income in a capitalist, consumerist world, you are not paying your bills. You're going to be homeless. Talk to me about that. Alhamdulillah, I think it's public news now that you've been exonerated and the suspension has been lifted, and you can go back to helping people change, helping people save lives. The job that you do, with the greatest respect to any other job out there, you don't do a basic mundane job. You save people's lives.
Well, you help people, and it's a privilege to do that. And you help all people. You don't ask them their views.
That's true.
And they don't ask you your views. And in fact, this is borne out by my experiences. Most people, even people who are aware of my case, and actually people who are aware of it through the hostile right-wing media, take me as they find me. And take their experience of me as they find me, rather than their experience of what they hear about me. But I think the main thing when you talk about livelihood and this and that, as Muslims, we believe that our rizq comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
The means by which I might collect it today might be a certain job, all right, might be a certain profession, but that isn't mean that my rizq, my provision, comes from this particular job or this particular profession. My rizq comes from Allah. And one of the most important things we have to learn as Muslims is that we rely on Allah alone, and we need to do the right thing. And if it has consequences in worldly terms, we trust Allah will look after us. I said this in a previous podcast. If Allah, who has provided me with food, shelter and clothing every day of my life, He's provided me with that, why do I suddenly think He's going to deprive me of that?
SubhanAllah.
And if He does, and that is my test, and that is the test of the people of Gaza, they don't have homes, they don't have food, they don't have new clothing. That is their test. Their test, and they're better than us, is that they trust Allah will help them, and they trust that Allah will bring them help if they're patient with the tests they have, and they don't want to complain about the tests they have. Right. So, but for most of us, the test is easier, in the sense that it's a fear that I'll lose what I had. But my own real life experience is food, clothing, shelter every single day. So with that track record, why do I fear that I'm going to have the worst case scenario? The evidence is on my side that I should reassure me. And the texts of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah, they should reassure me that Allah will provide for me. And that is actually how reminding ourselves of that is actually the way we overcome the fear. And we're human, I'm human. I will feel anxious, I will feel, question why this is happening. But actually in the end, when I remind myself of these things, I remember this is definitely the way that every Muslim should be. And the people of Gaza are teachers in this.
Remarkable, Doctor. Beautifully put, and it's a message for all of us. But Allah is Razikun. Our provisions are with Him, and it just naturally, how Piers Morgan tried to weaponize jihad. The biggest part of jihad and the biggest form of jihad, and correct me if I'm wrong, is one that speaks the truth against an oppressor.
Yeah, this is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is the afdalul jihad, the best of jihad, is the one who speaks the word of truth to the tyrant ruler. Well, Piers Morgan isn't a tyrant ruler, but we find ourselves in this day and age having to speak out, even though the tyranny of the system is trying to stop us. This is true. Jazakallah khair for this reminder.
No, barakallah fi. I think what you've just said prompted me into knowing this. Moving on to Trump. Before we do move on to Trump, was there anything else you wanted to speak or say on this particular matter?
Khair. You move on.
Yeah. Donald Trump.
Yes.
He was inaugurated not too long ago. And he's made very bold statements with his negotiation tactics, and he is dubbed and seen as a real estate businessman. Real estate, I'm using loosely. There's no point rehashing it. What do you think about Donald Trump's plan?
I think Trump is the one good thing about Trump is he says what corporate America, what established America, what the establishment West thinks. And we don't get the rubbish that we have from these other politicians that tries to dress up the nicely, yes, we care about the Palestinians, we want to give them a state, and all this stuff for the last century or more, that we don't want to jeopardize their rights of the indigenous people in Palestine from the Balfour Declaration and stuff. We don't get any of this nonsense. We just get plain speak from Donald Trump, right? And he just says it how they think it. And this way, the world knows where it stands. So, whilst the Biden administration somehow convinces its own side that their plans to ethnically cleanse Palestine is all part of security for quote unquote Israel, Trump just says it as it is. Yeah, let's clean them out. Let's get them somewhere else to live. He's even like one of those real estate salesmen that tells you can buy a property in Marbella and it's going to be beautiful, and actually when you get there it probably doesn't have a roof. It doesn't have the plumbing, doesn't have anything. You go there, you've bought a building site as your holiday home, and that's the kind of language that he uses, and it's disgusting. It's offensive, but it explains to the world that this occupation is not a country, it is a colony. It explains to the world that it is their colony. It was established by the British to be an influence in the Middle East, so that the British had a colonial foothold in the Middle East. And over the years, as the Americans have assumed after World War II, the Americans assumed a more global presence, it has become their colony. Former US Secretary of State Alexander Haig called it America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East. And the guy who's taken over as Trump's health secretary, Robert General Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., who was a presidential candidate during the presidential elections, he said the same thing. It's like our aircraft carrier in the Middle East. So it's a vital interest. Ukraine's a vital interest. Taiwan is a vital interest with China, Ukraine with Russia. The occupation of Palestine, what they call Israel, is a vital interest for the West, more vital than any of the others, because it is their foothold to try and control the most strategic land in the world, which is a crossroads of civilization, which is energy-rich resources, which, if it unified as it was a century ago, or a little over a century ago, under the Ottoman Khilafah, would be a superpower by any stretch of the imagination. And they need that colony there to achieve their interests. Trump is shameless about it. The others try to hide behind their own principles of human rights and international law and these things. Trump doesn't care. He really doesn't care. And that means we can see things as they are. But until such time as Muslims wake up and change the very servile regimes that we have in the Muslim world, we won't get any change. So you might have seen these terrible pictures of a press conference between Trump and King Abdullah of Jordan.
Yeah.
And this is like a bully standing next to the guy he's bullying, right? And the guy he's bullying effectively is living in the region. He can't even bring himself to say, no, you cannot expel people from Gaza into Jordan. He cannot bring himself to say you shouldn't be sending missiles and bombs to the Zionists to kill Palestinians. He cannot bring himself to do these things. Yet he has a military force that could seriously harm the plans of the occupation to harm people in Palestine, impede the occupiers from harming the people of Palestine. He has an army. He has an air force. Israel can't get anything it needs without Jordan, without Egypt, without the regional countries facilitating that. So this is, until and unless we realize this is, there's an Egyptian lawmaker today, he's reported as saying, because Israel's been making some very hostile statements to Egypt, right? So long after they've had a peace agreement. Very hostile. He says, if Israel makes a mistake, he said, the Egyptian army will take Tel Aviv. I'm sitting there thinking, he knows the Egyptian army is actually capable of taking Tel Aviv. And yet he's waiting. The last 15 months have meant nothing. The last 77 years have meant nothing. What are you waiting for? You're waiting for Egypt to do something hostile to Israel to do something hostile to Egypt before you think there's a need for the Egyptian army to intervene and help those people. So we have a problem at the moment where we think about our own national interest, our own country's interest, more than what Allah has prioritized. The human life of people suffering, the occupation of Masjid al-Aqsa, such a sacred place for Muslims. These are things that should matter to us, and until we change our thinking, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the need for military intervention, is I want people's thinking to change. I want people in the Muslim world to think differently about what is possible, what is capable, what is achievable. And in fact, you know what? The only time in human history when in that region of the Middle East, Muslims, Jews, Christians have lived side by side in some degree of fairness, justice, harmony and security was under Islamic rule. So those people who present an Islamic system in the Middle East, an Islamic civilization in the Middle East as being something threatening, need to look at their history and see that actually what's been threatening is the last century of colonial rule. That's what's threatened people. That's why we have dictators in the Middle East. That's why we have oppressors in the Middle East. That's why we have a colony that's killing people in Palestine in the Middle East. It's not because of Islamic rule, it's because of the absence of Islamic rule. When Islamic rule was there, Jews in Europe used to ask if they could go and have refuge in the Islamic world. And that's a badge of honor for us, actually. As Muslims, that's a badge of honor for us. And inshallah, that's what I want our psychology to change to, that actually we look forward to that badge of honor again, that we don't think of this in anything as a way as we want to bring goodness to the world and the region.
Thank you, Doctor. Bringing us back to the gruesome and palpable reality. Yes, I agree with you that Trump has flagrantly and openly said things he doesn't hide on. He doesn't masquerade under any UN convention or anything of that kind. He says it how it is, and he really reflects what most are thinking. And you've just beautifully articulated that Egypt will only go in if Israel offends Egypt.
Yeah.
Not to mention what's happened in Palestine for the last 15 months. The treatment's bigger.
Yeah.
The treaty is bigger, the Abraham Accords. Now, if Trump's proposal I mean, most of the world have said it's outrageous and they're not with him. But he doesn't need most of the world.
Yeah.
If he does go in,
Yeah.
and when he goes in, it means Israel goes in to occupy Gaza
Yeah.
and build on it and expel 2 million people.
Yeah.
What should the Muslim world do?
Yeah. So I think the Muslim world should do what it should be doing now, which is to unite and remove any obstacle which stops the right system and the right political will that should help the people of Gaza. They should be doing that now. They should have done that 15 months ago. They should do that then. But I think we have to understand Trump's tactics. He is a businessman, right? So if you go and barter with people, you want this price, he gives you this price. Yeah. He goes in like this. So he talks like, we want to take it over. We want to clear it out. We want to build a Riviera. Either he'll get that, or he'll use that as bargaining with, for example, the Saudi regime have effectively said, we will normalize with Israel if they give a Palestinian state. Now, Trump might say to them, well, they're not going to have a Palestinian state, but you can normalize with them and then we won't occupy. All right. Or something like this. Right. So it's kind of like, it's brinksmanship. It's his style of negotiation. It's like literally, I want £1,000 for my car. And you say, no, I'm going to give you 100. Yeah. And then you say, no, I want okay, let's go to 900. He says, no, you pay me 100 now. And I'll take it off your hands. It's that style of harsh negotiation. And he's got power behind him. He can withdraw aid to Jordan. He can withdraw aid to Egypt. These countries don't have good economies. The regimes are unstable enough. I think he's playing with fire. If he goes down that road, he's playing with fire. These regimes are not strong. They are very vulnerable. They are very fragile. You destabilize a country economically, and you don't know what the outcome will be afterwards. So maybe he doesn't understand the region so well, but I think he has people around him who do. And I think they will advise him, you know what, if you push this too far, you can potentially destabilize the region.
But he has Zionists, all of these advisors and his cabinet. Yeah. They're all Zionists.
Yeah, they are. And if he surrounds himself by people with one way of thinking, they may advise him the wrong thing. If he advises himself by people, even who are pro-Zionist, but who understand the politics of the Middle East and how fragile these regimes are, he will get advised, this is a bad, dangerous thing, because we need King Abdullah. We need General Sisi. President Sisi. We need these people there, because if you don't have them, you don't know what you're going to get. Yeah, that's the, and obviously, inshallah, that could mean a change for the better for the Muslim world, but we don't wish for him to do the wrong thing. Yeah, that's the way I would put it. I don't wish for him to score an own goal, which would damage so many people in the process.
And kill so many.
The
two-state solution. Now, this statement was thrown about almost like a rugby ball throughout this genocide.
Yeah.
And some countries have at times increased the decibel and said, yes, there must be a two-state solution when this comes to an end, when the hostages are released, when the bombing is done, we must have a two-state solution. Talk to me about the hypocrisy of countries, one foot in, one foot out, about the two-state solution. Because all of a sudden, the two-state solution, with Trump trumping with his statement, the two-state solution has taken not even a back seat. We've left it in the rearview mirror.
Yeah. So, I think you have to understand that actually the biggest obstacle to any two-state solution over the decades has been Israel itself, the occupiers themselves. Because the reason for this is when they first occupied Palestine, and they were before the occupation of Palestine even, the Zionist project was one that would have been happy for a state in some part of the Middle East. But actually the real uber Zionists, the ultra Zionist thinkers want what was all of historic, what they call Israel.
So Syria.
Part of Syria, part of Jordan, part of Egypt, and all of Palestine, what they call Eretz Israel, Greater Israel. And so they have no intention of giving the West Bank and Gaza. Those people have no intention of giving West Bank and Gaza to the Palestinians to make a state. Now, even if they did, West Bank and Gaza are not viable to be a state. They're divided by miles. They aren't viable entities. They would not be allowed their own security. They would be airports. They would not be allowed everything. They would be vulnerable because they'd be literally surrounded. They'd be vulnerable to attack. And so, on one hand, you have the majority in the political elite in the occupation, which wants all the Palestinians out into neighboring Arab countries and to occupy the whole region. And you have a minority that's talking about a two-state solution and all these other countries talking about it when it's not a viable thing. It's actually not a viable, and you're surrendering 80% of historic Palestine. And you're basically saying everyone's got to accept the last 20%. And all those people that lost their homes and their farms and their olive groves from the past, they won't be allowed back. They won't have a right of return. So there is no solution. So it's a hypocrisy.
Well said. Final question, Doctor. Go back to jihad, military intervention. Can you fathom or envisage a Muslim country militarily intervening?
Yeah, yes, I can envisage, but not under the current structures.
So not in our lifetime, is that what you're saying?
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it could happen tomorrow if the things change. And things we've seen in the last 12 months, in the last 2 years, how quickly things change in Afghanistan, how things quickly change in Bangladesh, how things quickly change in Syria. So change can happen quickly. But what we didn't see in those three places really, or certainly not in Bangladesh and in Syria, is we haven't seen a change where people are willing to break out of the idea that we are just one nation, that we want to unify with the other countries, that we have a duty to Muslims in Palestine. You still have this idea of we are one nation state. We have to overcome that, number one. And number two, we have to be willing to do what Allah says is right and trust in Allah. And Allah says that actually, if you are capable, if you have the military capability to go in and rescue people who are screaming out to be rescued, whose children have been slaughtered, who have the highest number of child amputees in the world, whose schools have been destroyed, whose hospitals have been destroyed, you're obliged to do it. So it could happen tomorrow, literally. It's not that it won't happen in our lifetime. It may not happen in our lifetime, but it could happen tomorrow. Yeah, that's the way you need to see it. If there's a momentum for change, and if things suddenly spiral the way that we've seen the way they can spiral in the world, it should give us confidence it can happen. And really, the more we talk about the way things should happen, if those changes happen politically, there's more chance that the ball falls in the right area, that we can carry it to its goal, basically. So I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic. These are tests from Allah. We need to be steadfast, and we need to not stop talking about the right thing. That's the thing. That too many of us create obstacles in our own mind as to what could be the solution. Why? Why do we do that? There's no need to do that. Actually, we need to raise our horizons to what is possible and keep talking about that and keep convincing people that's possible. And inshallah, Allah will carry our messages far.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jazakallah khairan.
Barakallahu feek.
This has been such a profound and powerful interview. And if Piers Morgan is watching, he is watching, he will finally get your answer to what you should have said a year and a half ago. And to those that are vilifying you, any viewer, Muslim or non-Muslim alike, would agree with me to say, what a wonderful person you are, mashallah. I'm not just saying that. May Allah preserve you, honour you, give you the courage. And I think from my perspective, and those that are significantly younger than you, we look up to your courage and your bravery. I had Uncle Shahid Butt on last week, and this man is a soldier, and it's your generation we look to get that courage and that bravery and to speak about what's right and stand up for justice. And unfortunately, in our generation, we're more concerned about us. Is it going to affect me?
All people, we're human beings. Yeah. We could all be that. You just need to keep reminding yourself of where the real control lies, and it lies with Allah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Dr. Abdul Wahid, on with us today. What a remarkable, remarkable person. May Allah make his endeavors easy. Those powers that be that are trying to unjustly destroy his life, you won't do that. He's a man of stature, he's a man of resilience, and he's a man that speaks the truth, and all of us can take heed from him. I do have a question for Piers Morgan. Do you condemn IDF? That's my question to you. Think about it, ruminate around it, and then in your next episode perhaps you can talk about with how much you condemn the IDF or not. If you do like what we stand for, please join our movement. Silent Majority is about the majority. It's for the people, by the people. So please join our movement, subscribe to us, comment, engage, tell us what we need to cover, and let's create a movement that actually is a mouthpiece for justice and fairness and a catalyst to change society for the better. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bringing you the conversations that matter. Join the movement and subscribe. Thanks for watching.